Thank you for coming out.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I was taking some notes on the subway this morning and writing about alienation and the effect that capitalism has on workers throughout the world, and especially here in New York City. And it really, I found it pretty ironic and interesting in general that as I write about the oppression that workers suffer through capitalism, to my left and to my right, there are people right next to me who are going through the same form of exploitation that I'm sure we've all been through. Just to give you some background on myself, I'm a graduate student at NYU. I'm studying politics, and I'm also a member of FIST. And I'm very, very supportive of the struggle toward socialism and the struggle toward eliminating capitalism. Because as we all know, it is failing and it is crumbling. And as Karl Marx once said himself, capitalists are their own gravediggers, meaning that capitalism is designed in a way for it to collapse on itself. So it's a matter of us to be able to be there to push the capitalists out and to build socialism in the United States and the world. Just to give you guys a little introduction to alienation, this is one of Karl Marx's biggest concepts in terms of his political theory. And alienation is pretty much the idea that in capitalism, workers are detached from the work that they produce and the labor that they produce. Meaning that if a worker produces a pair of boots at a factory and gets paid $10 an hour, his boss will sell those pair of boots for $80 and will walk away with $70 for himself. And sure, he'll spend $10 or $20 on production and $10 or $20 on putting those boots on the market, but the boss ultimately walks away with more money than the worker. And guess what? If it's wintertime and the worker doesn't have money to buy boots, he has to spend more hours at work to buy the same pair of boots that he's producing and doesn't have access to. So this is very important in understanding capitalism. And I've in my circle of friends and activists, I come across a lot of people who say, well, we shouldn't question capitalism. We shouldn't try to destroy it. We should try to reform it and try to mold it so that it can benefit the workers. But my response to that is that no, because capitalism intrinsically is designed to exploit the worker. It's not about how much money they're getting paid. It's not just about, sure, the minimum wage is important and raising it is important, but it's about understanding that within capitalism there are certain forms of exploitation that you cannot eliminate. And as I just mentioned before, that's simply called the labor theory of surplus value, where the worker puts in a certain amount of labor time into a product and his boss will sell it for a certain exchange value and will leave with more money than the worker actually walks away with. So I think that's important in really understanding how capitalism works. And Karl Marx, is known for studying socialism and promoting socialism and communism, but what's interesting is he actually spent most of his time studying capitalism, and he spent most of his time understanding the relations that people have with one another and the products that they consume. And one of the central tenets of alienation is this concept that humans, we create these instruments and ideas and products and commodities that we put so much energy and time and labor into, and eventually they end up destroying us. So, a worker who is producing clothes or boots or any form of commodity at his job will eventually be overcome by the desire to purchase more of that, which is called the fetishism of commodities, where we identify ourselves not as humans, not as Ramiro, but as the name brand shirt that I have or the watch that I have. And that's, in capitalism, that's one of the biggest forms of decay and ultimately the biggest forms of dehumanization, where people don't identify by what they contribute to society, but rather the products that they consume, which is one of the central tenets of capitalism that Marx examines. In capitalism, workers do not have complete access to the means of production, meaning that if they want to produce something, they have to go to capitalists and bosses who have the means of production to produce that, and therefore they enter, as Caleb mentioned earlier, a form of dictatorship in the workplace where the worker has to abide by what their bosses set and the rules that they set and how they sell things, meaning that decisions are not made democratically, but rather are made in terms of profit. what happens in capitalism is money serves as an intermediary between commodities and different objects that we need. Meaning that if I'm hungry and if I want to eat some oranges, I can't just go and pick them off the tree. I have to get money and then buy oranges at the market. And when as humans, we give money this form of power, because it's an intermediary between commodities. And what happens at that point is that money accrues so much energy and power from humans that it ends up overtaking ourselves, and it ends up controlling the decisions we make. And decisions aren't made in terms of what is necessary, but rather what is necessary in a capitalist society. And with alienation, I think one of the most important things to mention is the fact that in the workplace, and I'm sure we've all experienced it, we are not ourselves. We are there to sell. We are there to sell our labor, and we can't fully tap into our creative potential, into what we want to do. If we work at a museum, if we're a curator, it's ultimately the decision of the owner of that museum to control what exhibits are going on, how they should be displayed. And you can really use that example in any other situation in a capitalist institution, where workers are essentially in an 8-hour dictatorship, and they get paid crumbs of what the bosses actually make. And that's important to notice. And with alienation, I think one of the most interesting aspects of it is this concept of estrangement, and the idea that as humans in capitalism, we become so detached from what reality is. We become so attached to money and the pursuit of money that we become estranged from our family, from our surroundings, from our environment. And on a larger scale, these capitalists that create these businesses and are in the pursuit of capital, they become estranged from their environment and don't realize the repercussions involved with damaging the environment and maximizing profits. So ultimately, as I mentioned before, it's not just about reforming capitalism, which is one of the biggest myths, and which we find today. And I actually had a conversation with Caleb a few weeks back, and he brought up an excellent point where there's this new form of anti-communism, and it's basically, we know capitalism is wrong, but we also don't want to move towards socialism. And I thought that was very interesting, because so many people don't have a clue as to what capitalism exactly is. And the moment that you can step back and study capitalism and see the way it changes our relations as humans, and the way that families are broken up by money, the way that businesses are broken up by money, and the way that workers are divided according to the products that they consume, and the brands that they wear, and the music that they listen to, and the companies where they work, and the schools where they go, that ultimately divides us as a working class. And alienation, what it produces is it makes people think that they have a chance of getting to where the 1% is, which is called, if you really read some political philosophy, that's Plato's noble lie, where the members of the lower classes generally have this idea that they can get to a point to where the highest people of society are, and they can't. And that's what keeps capitalism going. The American dream, this idea that we can get to, where the 1% is, but we can't. And it's our time to really understand that, and we need to wake up and step back and see what capitalism is. And capitalism does not work for the worker, dehumanizes the worker, especially in the workplace. I'm sure, on your way to work, as soon as you're clocking in to work, or wherever it is that you are, you have a sense of kind of hopelessness and a sense of, not being in control of the way that the operations function. And I think under socialism, we can have a system where workers own the means of production and share it and exchange, where there are no CEOs, where there are no presidents, and workers decide things as a community. And ultimately, alienation is one of the symptoms of capitalism, and I think that's something that will work to our favor, where we can bring people in and say, well, look, do you feel threatened at your job place because you feel like you might lose your job? Do you feel like you're not yourself, and you're selling things that might not be for your own interest, and you're basically selling products for someone else? And I think the second we can kind of point to these different contradictions of capitalism and bring people in and say, look, this is what capitalism is, this is how it dehumanizes workers and people in general, then people will have more of an expanded consciousness as to how dehumanized we really are. We live in a society now where more people know about Kim Kardashian or Kanye West or the Super Bowl or anything else going on within pop culture that's owned by the capitalists, by the 1%, to keep us distracted from what's really going on. And most people don't know just how devastated our environment is, how quickly this planet is deteriorating, and how quickly crime, inequality, and health, and the destruction of healthcare is increasing. And it's a sad reality, but ultimately, as Marx said, you know, capitalists are their own grave diggers, and these things will bring consciousness among people, and will make people realize that the system we have now does not work and is not sustainable, and we cannot continue living like this. And I think, you know, if you want to see an example of alienation and capitalism, just look at different programs in the Southwest, in Arizona, for example, or Colorado, or New Mexico, where you literally have these capitalists who own ranches and farms and pay workers, illegal workers, undocumented workers, 30 cents an hour without anyone finding out. They're dehumanizing these people. These are the fathers of families. These are members of a family that need to eat and are sending money back to their families in other countries. And you have these people basically buying labor at a very cheap price because they know that they're desperate for it. And I think ultimately we have to question our system when we have more empty homes than homeless people, when we have more food than hungry people. That's irrational. And you find so many capitalists who will say, well, look, the Soviet Union collapsed, obviously socialism doesn't work. Well, I think it's a very vague misunderstanding of socialism, and if they really have done their research, they'll understand that the Soviet Union collapsed when it started implementing capitalism, and when they started commoditizing labor, and when they started implementing these reforms. And ultimately, I think one of the most important things to say about alienation is that it affects people in so many different facets, not just in the workplace, but their relations with people. I'm sure you've had arguments with friends over money or with family, and I think it's interesting how a commodity like money, which we give so much importance to, has had the power to make certain countries invade other countries, and to break families apart and to divide the working class. And another form of alienation is where we divide ourselves as workers along religious lines, geopolitical lines, along lines of nationality, and these are constructs that were created by the capitalists. My family is from Honduras. I didn't choose to be colonized by the Spanish, and vice versa. You can see that with so many different countries, and we're so prideful with these titles like nationalism and the name brands, and we're so consumed with these different labels that we obsess over them. And these labels are created by the capitalists to give workers a false sense of belonging to this capitalist class. But in reality, they're laughing at us because they know we'll never get to that point. And it's time, at that point, we need to realize that we're just like babies receiving candy from parents and being distracted. And we need to realize that we're alienated in so many different ways that are unimaginable. And, just to really close off, I think it's important to mention that under socialism, we recognize that the human need comes first, and that the community view comes first. It's not about the individual. And that's what the neoliberal tradition has brought upon us, this concept of, if you're unemployed, if you have debt, that's your fault. And we, as socialists, we're against that, because we say that there are conditions that are put in place that we may not see that alienate us from being able to eradicate that. And I think under socialism, we can have a world where, as Karl Marx said, we work, from each according to his ability to each according to his need. Meaning that if you're able to work a certain amount and you can't surpass the limit, then that's how much you work. We're not going to force you to work 90 hours a week, 80 hours, and an insane amount of time. Whereas, and also in terms of needs, we realize what we actually need, and we put more value into things that have what's called use value, into things like food and healthcare, and not gold. For example, gold is one of the most highly priced commodities in the world, but all you can really do with gold is, it's a luxury item. You see it, and it brings a form of status and wealth, but you can't eat gold. You can't use it to clean your house. You can't use it to learn. And I think that's important, where we distinguish different values. And as socialists, we need to move toward a system where workers will be respected and the values and the goals of the community are put first before money, which is our product. We created money, and it's now our time to eliminate it. Thank you.